Marcus Webb had been mayor-elect of Riverside City for exactly 3 days when he made a decision that would shock his campaign staff, horrify his security detail, and ultimately transform how the city treated its most vulnerable residents. "You want to do what?" His campaign manager, Jennifer Torres, stared at him across the transition office conference table like he'd lost his mind. 2 weeks, undercover, living on the streets. Marcus spoke calmly, though he knew how it sounded. "I need to understand the city from the ground up before I take office. The real city, not the sanitized version politicians see. Marcus, you just won by the largest margin in city history. You're the first black mayor this city has ever elected. The inauguration is in 2 weeks. You should be preparing transition documents, not experiencing what 3,000 of my constituents experience every night." Marcus leaned forward. "Jennifer, I spent 20 years as a community organizer. I ran on a platform of addressing homelessness, police accountability, and economic inequality. How can I implement policies if I don't understand the reality? You could talk to social workers, visit shelters, where people will know who I am and act differently. I need to be invisible. I need to see how this city actually treats people when they think nobody important is watching." Jennifer knew that look. She'd worked with Marcus for 5 years, watched him turn a grassroots neighborhood council into a political movement powerful enough to defeat a 2-term incumbent. When Marcus Webb decided something was necessary, he didn't compromise. 2 weeks, she said finally. "You miss one check-in call, I'm sending the entire police department to find you." Deal. But Jennifer? Nobody knows. Not the transition team, not my family. Only you. 3 days later, Marcus Webb disappeared from his downtown apartment and reappeared on the streets of Riverside's warehouse district, an area he'd promised to revitalize but had never truly experienced after dark. He wore clothes from Goodwill, carried a worn backpack with a sleeping bag, and left behind his phone, wallet, and everything that identified him as anyone other than another middle-aged black man who'd fallen through society's cracks. The first night was brutally educational. The cold he'd expected, the fear he'd anticipated. What shocked him was the absolute invisibility. People walked past him setting up his sleeping spot under an overpass like he was furniture. Couples heading to trendy restaurants in the arts district stepped around him without breaking conversation. A group of college students laughed as they tossed their leftover pizza box near him. Not to him, just near him, like he was a convenient trash receptacle. By the third night, Marcus had learned the geography of street survival. The library where you could stay warm until closing. The church that served breakfast at 6 a.m. The gas station bathroom that didn't require a key. The police officers who moved you along versus the ones who left you alone. And then there was Officer Derek Brennan. Marcus first encountered him on night 4. He'd found a relatively safe spot behind a closed furniture store, away from main streets, but not so isolated that he'd be completely vulnerable. He was settling in for the night when a flashlight beam hit his face. "You can't stay here." The voice was young, authoritative, and utterly disinterested in discussion. Marcus shielded his eyes against the light. "I'm not bothering anyone, officer. I'll be gone by morning." "You'll be gone now. This is private property. The store is closed." "I'm not." "Are you arguing with me?" The flashlight moved closer, and Marcus could now see Officer Brennan clearly. Mid-30s, white, with the particular body language of someone who viewed authority as permission for aggression rather than responsibility for service. Marcus had dealt with officers like Brennan during his community organizing work. He knew the type, not malicious necessarily, but operating from a worldview where certain people deserved protection and others deserved removal. "No, sir. I'm just explaining that I'll leave before the business opens. I'm not causing any. What you're causing is a public nuisance. Let me see some ID." Marcus had anticipated this. The ID he carried listed his name as Marcus Williams, his mother's maiden name, with an address from 3 years ago. Technically valid, practically useless. Brennan examined it with his flashlight, then handed it back. "You from the east side?" "Originally." "Figures. You know what your problem is? You people come into decent neighborhoods, bring down property values, make people feel unsafe." Brennan's tone was conversational, like he was discussing weather, not casually dehumanizing another person. We've been trying to clean up this area. New businesses moving in, property development, can't have vagrants sleeping behind buildings. I'm a human being, not a vagrant. You're trespassing. You want me to write that up officially? Because I can arrest you for that. Marcus swallowed his anger. Getting arrested, even under a false name, would compromise the entire project. I'll move. Where would you suggest I go? Brennan shrugged. Shelter on 5th Street. Or better yet, leave Riverside entirely. Try the city mission across the county line. This city's changing, upgrading. No place for people who can't contribute. As Marcus gathered his belongings, Brennan added, Do yourself a favor. If you see me again, just move along before I have to tell you. Saves us both time. Over the next 10 days, Marcus saw Officer Brennan 7 more times. Each encounter followed the same script. Brennan would find him, tell him to move, deliver some variation of people like you don't belong here, and make vague threats about arrest or deportation to another jurisdiction. Marcus documented everything in a small notebook he kept hidden. Brennan's badge number, the times and locations, the specific language used, but more importantly, he watched how Brennan interacted with others. With white homeless individuals, Brennan was curt but professional. With Black or Latino individuals, he was demeaning and aggressive. Marcus watched him roughly search a Hispanic man for no stated reason, saw him dump out a Black woman's belongings while checking for contraband, observed him call an elderly Black veteran boy while moving him away from a bus shelter. This wasn't just one bad encounter. This was systematic dehumanization enabled by a badge and the assumption that his targets were too invisible for their treatment to matter. On day 12, Marcus met James, a veteran who'd been living on the streets for 6 months after his wife died. They shared a spot under the 10th Street Bridge, and James told him about his encounters with Brennan. That cop has it out for us, James said, heating instant coffee over a small camping stove. Especially us Black folks. He took my sleeping bag once, said it was abandoned property. It was the middle of winter, man. I filed a complaint with that police accountability hotline the city set up. You know what happened? Nothing. They said it was my word against an officer's and there was no evidence. Marcus listened, his anger building. He'd campaigned on police accountability, promised reform, and now he was seeing firsthand why those reforms were necessary. The worst part, James continued, is that Brennan keeps telling us to leave his city. Like he owns it. Like we're not citizens too, not human beings who just need help. He acts like being homeless is a crime, like we chose this. On day 13, Marcus had his final encounter with Officer Brennan. He was gathering his things from behind a closed restaurant, preparing to return to his life as mayor-elect, when the familiar flashlight beam found him. You again. I thought I told you to leave my city. Marcus stood slowly, shouldering his backpack. It's not your city, officer. It's everyone's city. Talking back now? You getting brave? Brennan stepped closer, his hand resting on his baton. Let me make something clear to you. I've been a cop in Riverside for 12 years. I know every corner of this place, and I know that people like you, people who can't even afford a roof over their heads, you're the reason property values drop. You're the reason tourists don't feel safe. You're the reason I have to waste my time doing sweeps instead of real police work. Real police work like serving and protecting all citizens? Brennan's jaw tightened. You think you're clever? Let me tell you what I think. I think you're one bad decision away from me finding a reason to put you in lockup for 72 hours. Maybe I'll find something in that backpack. Maybe you'll resist arrest. Maybe I'll just get tired of seeing your face in my district. Marcus met his eyes steadily. Your district? That's right. My district, my city. And in 2 weeks, when we inaugurate a new mayor who actually cares about law and order, we're going to clean up this town properly. No more soft approach. No more tolerance for people who drag down decent neighborhoods. You're looking forward to the new mayor's administration? Damn right. Marcus Webb ran on tough on crime, economic development, making Riverside a place families want to live. That means people like you need to find somewhere else to be." Marcus smiled slightly. The irony was almost too perfect. "I'll keep that in mind, officer." "You do that, and do us both a favor. I don't want to see you again. Next time, I won't be so nice." As Brennan walked away, Marcus pulled out his burner phone and texted Jennifer. "Coming back tomorrow. We need to talk about police reform. It's worse than I thought." The next morning, Marcus Webb returned to his apartment, showered, shaved, and stepped back into his role as mayor-elect. But something fundamental had changed. He'd entered those 2 weeks thinking he understood poverty and homelessness. He'd left understanding that the cruelty wasn't just systemic. It was personal, delivered by individuals who'd learned to see certain people as problems rather than humans. And one of those individuals would be at his inauguration ceremony, having no idea that the vagrant he'd harassed for 2 weeks was about to become his boss. The man who'd told Marcus to leave his city was about to discover whose city it actually was. The morning of January 15th arrived cold and clear. Riverside City Hall's Grand Plaza had been transformed for the inauguration ceremony. Rows of white chairs, a stage draped in city colors, and security checkpoints manned by officers in dress uniforms. Marcus stood in the mayor's office, his office now, adjusting his tie while Jennifer ran through the final schedule. Oath at 11 a.m., followed by your inaugural address. Keep it under 20 minutes. Then the reception in the rotunda, meet and greet with city department heads, and the evening gala. She paused. "You sure you're ready for this?" Marcus looked at himself in the mirror. Clean-shaven, tailored suit, American flag pin on his lapel. He barely recognized the man who'd spent 2 weeks sleeping under bridges. "I'm ready." "Is the police chief here yet?" "Chief Morrison arrived 10 minutes ago. He's waiting downstairs with his command staff." "Good. I'll need to meet with him privately after the ceremony. Add it to the schedule." Jennifer made a note but looked concerned. "Marcus, what happened out there? You've been different since you came back." "I learned that the gap between policy and practice is wider than I thought. And I learned that some people in uniform see their job as protecting certain citizens from other citizens rather than serving everyone equally." Marcus turned from the mirror. "We have work to do, Jennifer." A lot of work. The plaza filled quickly. City council members, department heads, business leaders, community activists who'd supported Marcus's campaign. News cameras captured everything. This was historic. Riverside's first black mayor swept into office on promises of reform and equity. Among the crowd of uniformed officers providing security was Derek Brennan. He stood near the perimeter, scanning the crowd with the vigilant expression of someone who saw a threat assessment as his primary duty. He'd requested this assignment specifically. Protecting the new mayor felt like real police work, unlike the homeless sweeps he'd been doing lately. Brennan had voted for Marcus Webb. The campaign's tough-on-crime rhetoric, the promises about economic development and cleaning up troubled neighborhoods, that resonated with Brennan's worldview. Finally, a mayor who understood that some people contributed to society and others dragged it down. The ceremony began with the usual pageantry: color guard, national anthem, invocation from a local pastor. Then came the moment everyone had waited for. "Ladies and gentlemen," the city clerk announced, "please welcome Mayor-elect Marcus Webb." Marcus walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. He waved, smiled, took his position before the judge who would administer the oath. In the security perimeter, Brennan clapped politely. The new mayor looked good, professional, confident, mayoral. This was going to be a positive change for Riverside. Marcus raised his right hand and repeated the oath. "I, Marcus Webb, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of Mayor of Riverside City and will to the best of my ability preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution and laws of this state and city." "Congratulations, Mr. Mayor." The judge shook his hand as the crowd erupted in applause. Marcus approached the podium, arranged his notes, and began his inaugural address. "My fellow citizens of Riverside, thank you for the trust you've placed in me. Today, as I assume this office, I do so with a clear understanding of the challenges we face and the work ahead." The speech was everything his supporters hoped for: inspiring, specific, progressive, yet pragmatic. He talked about affordable housing, economic opportunity, education reform. Then his tone shifted. But before I outline my policy agenda, I want to tell you about the past 2 weeks, about what I learned when I decided to experience our city not as your mayor-elect, but as one of the 3,000 residents who sleep on our streets every night. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Jennifer's head snapped up from her phone. The police chief's expression went from polite attention to sharp focus. For 14 days, I lived homeless in Riverside. I slept under bridges and behind businesses. I ate at soup kitchens and warmed myself in public libraries. And I learned something profound about our city, that we have 2 different standards of treatment, 2 different levels of dignity, depending on whether we see someone as a citizen or a problem. Brennan's smile faded. He leaned forward slightly, trying to process what he was hearing. I was moved along from public spaces. I was told I didn't belong in certain neighborhoods. I was searched without cause, threatened with arrest for existing in public spaces, and informed repeatedly by one particular officer that I should leave his city. Brennan's stomach dropped. The words sounded familiar. Horribly, impossibly familiar. That officer told me that people like me, his words, drag down property values, make tourists uncomfortable, waste police resources. He told me that the new mayor, meaning me, would implement tougher policies, that there would be no more tolerance for people who, in his view, don't contribute to Riverside's economic success. The plaza had gone completely silent. Every camera was now focused on Marcus. Reporters frantically typed on phones. Marcus pulled out a small notebook. On January 3rd, behind the furniture store on 10th Street, January 5th under the 5th Street overpass, January 7th, 9th, and 11th at various locations, same officer, badge number 2847, each time the same message, move along, you don't belong here, this city is upgrading. Brennan felt dizzy. This couldn't be happening. The vagrant he'd been routing for 2 weeks was, no, it was impossible. Now, I want to be clear, Marcus continued, his voice calm but firm. This officer was doing what he believed was his job. He was enforcing what he thought the community wanted, the removal of visible poverty rather than the addressing of its causes. And that's not just his failure, that's our failure. As a city, as a community, as the people who set policies and priorities. Chief Morrison was already moving toward Brennan's position, his face grim. So here's what we're going to do, Marcus said. Effective immediately, I'm establishing a commission to review all police interactions with homeless individuals over the past 2 years. We're implementing mandatory training on poverty, mental health, and de-escalation. We're creating a civilian oversight board with real authority. And we're fundamentally changing how this city approaches homelessness, not as a law enforcement issue, but as a public health and housing issue. The crowd erupted in applause, half cheering, half stunned. Officer Derek Brennan, Marcus said, and the entire plaza seemed to hold its breath. I know you're here today providing security for this ceremony. I'd like you to join me on stage. Brennan stood frozen. Every eye was now searching the crowd for him. Chief Morrison reached his position. Officer Brennan now, the chief said quietly but firmly. Brennan walked toward the stage like a man heading to his own execution. His legs barely functioned. His mind raced through every interaction, every word he'd said to that homeless man who was now standing at the mayoral podium. Marcus waited patiently as Brennan climbed the steps and approached the microphone. Up close, recognition was immediate and devastating. Same face, same eyes, same man Brennan had told to leave his city just days ago. Officer Brennan, Marcus said, his tone surprisingly neutral. Do you recognize me? Brennan's throat was completely dry. Yes, sir. Mr. Mayor. Yes. Did you know who I was during our encounters? No, sir. I had no idea. Marcus nodded. And if you had known, would you have treated me differently? The question hung in the air. Brennan understood the trap. If he said yes, he admitted his treatment of homeless people was wrong. If he said no, he claimed he'd have treated the mayor-elect the same way. Brennan started, then stopped. The honest answer was yes, he would have treated Marcus differently. But saying that meant admitting every homeless person he'd ever routed deserved that same different treatment. "Let me make this easier," Marcus said. "The question isn't whether you would have treated me differently if you'd known my position. The question is whether every person you encounter deserves the same basic dignity regardless of their position." Brennan said nothing. There was nothing he could say. "Officer Brennan, you're not fired. You're not suspended. You're not being made an example of because you're not the only problem. You're a symptom of a larger problem in how we've trained and directed our police force." Marcus's voice softened slightly. "But you are going to be the first officer in our new training program. You're going to spend 3 months working directly with homeless services, learning the stories of the people you've been moving along. You're going to understand that your city belongs to all of us. And then you're going to help train other officers." Brennan looked up, surprised. "Sir?" "You have a choice, officer. You can resign, go to another department, continue believing that some people matter more than others. Or you can stay, learn, grow, and help make sure no other officer in Riverside treats human beings like problems to be removed." Marcus extended his hand. "What's it going to be?" Brennan stared at the offered hand. He thought about the past 2 weeks, about every person he'd routed, every sleeping bag he'd confiscated, every time he'd told someone they didn't belong. He thought about the man under the bridge who he'd almost arrested for existing. He shook Marcus's hand. "I'll stay, sir. And I'll learn." The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some applauded the mercy, others wanted harsher consequences. But Marcus had made his point. Reform wasn't about revenge, it was about transformation. As Brennan returned to his position, humiliated but somehow lighter, Marcus concluded his address. "Riverside, we have challenges ahead, but we face them as one city, one community where every person matters, where a badge is a tool for service, not superiority, where homelessness is met with housing, not harassment. That's the city we're building together. Thank you." 6 months after the inauguration, Officer Derek Brennan stood in the basement community room of St. Mary's Church, facing 23 Riverside police officers who'd been assigned to the new Community Connection Training Program. "My name is Derek Brennan," he began, his voice steady despite the discomfort that still accompanied these sessions. "6 months ago, I told our mayor to leave what I called my city. I didn't know he was the mayor, I just knew he was homeless, and I decided that was enough reason to treat him as less than human." The officers watched him with mixed expressions, some sympathetic, others skeptical, a few openly hostile to what they saw as political correctness run amok. "Today, I'm going to introduce you to some people. And I'm going to ask you to do something that's harder than any physical training you've done. I'm going to ask you to listen." He gestured to the door where James entered, the veteran Marcus had met under the 10th Street Bridge. Behind him came Rita, a former nurse battling addiction, then Carlos, who'd lost everything to medical debt. 12 formerly homeless individuals, now all housed through the city's new rapid housing program. "These are your neighbors," Brennan said, "and each of them is going to tell you their story. Not to make you feel guilty, but to help you understand that homelessness isn't a crime. It's a circumstance. And how we respond to that circumstance defines what kind of city we are." The program Brennan now led was just one piece of Mayor Webb's comprehensive reform agenda. In 6 months, Riverside had transformed its approach to homelessness from enforcement to support. The numbers told part of the story. 847 people housed through rapid housing programs, 423 enrolled in job training, 156 receiving mental health treatment, 89 reconnected with family. But the real change was harder to quantify. It was in the moment an officer offered a blanket instead of a citation, or when a business owner called social services instead of the police. Not everyone supported the changes. The Business Improvement District complained about enabling homeless camps. Conservative council members accused Marcus of being soft on crime. Talk radio hosts called the reforms naive. But Marcus had learned during his 2 weeks on the streets that criticism from people who'd never experienced vulnerability was just noise. What mattered was whether the city was becoming more humane. The Police Oversight Board had reviewed 237 complaints about interactions with homeless individuals. 17 officers received additional training, 3 were reassigned. 1, a veteran officer with a pattern of excessive force, was terminated. The changes rippled outward. The fire department added social workers to response teams. The library trained staff on mental health first aid. Local hospitals established street medicine programs. And Officer Brennan became an unlikely face of transformation. Local news covered his journey from the cop who harassed the mayor to the officer leading reform. Some saw redemption, others saw convenient optics. Marcus saw something more complex, a man learning that empathy wasn't weakness and that admitting you were wrong was the beginning of doing better. On a warm June evening, Marcus stood at the ribbon cutting for the Riverside Navigation Center, a one-stop facility offering housing services, medical care, job training, and mental health support. The building had once been a vacant warehouse. Now, it was hope. "Mr. Mayor, how does it feel to see your vision become reality?" a reporter asked. Marcus looked at the line of people already waiting to access services. "It feels like a beginning, not an ending. We've housed almost 900 people in 6 months. That's 900 lives changed. But we still have over 2,000 people on our streets. The work continues." Some critics say your reforms are too expensive, that the city can't afford to house everyone. We can't afford not to. The cost of emergency room visits, police interactions, and jail stays for homeless individuals was costing us $47 million annually. Our Housing First approach costs $31 million and actually solves the problem. It's not just morally right, it's fiscally responsible. After the ceremony, Marcus found Brennan organizing supplies inside the center. "You didn't have to volunteer today," Marcus said. "You're off duty." Brennan looked up from the boxes of toiletries he was sorting. "I know, sir. But I've been thinking about something you said at your inauguration, about service versus superiority. And I spent 12 years in this job thinking a badge gave me the right to decide who belonged in public spaces, like I was the gatekeeper of decency." Brennan set down a box. "But these past 6 months, working directly with people experiencing homelessness, I've learned they're just people. With stories, with reasons, with dignity. I was the problem, not them. That's a hard thing to admit. It was harder living with who I'd become without admitting it." Brennan gestured to the center's lobby where staff were checking in the first clients. "This place, what you've built, it gives me hope that we can be better, that I can be better." Marcus nodded. "You are better, Derek. That's why I chose you to lead the training program. Not because you were perfect, but because you were honest about being imperfect. That's what we need, people willing to admit when they're wrong and do the work to change." 3 months later, the city's annual homeless count showed a 43% reduction in unsheltered individuals. National media picked up the story. Other cities sent delegations to study Riverside's model. Marcus was invited to speak at conferences, to advise other mayors, to write op-eds about housing first approaches. But his most important appearance was at James's apartment warming party. The veteran who'd shared coffee under the 10th Street Bridge now had a 1-bedroom apartment in a renovated building downtown. The Navigation Center had helped him find work as a peer counselor, helping other veterans transition off the streets. "Mr. Mayor," James greeted him at the door. Come in. You're the guest of honor." The small apartment was packed with people. Other formerly homeless individuals now housed, caseworkers from the Navigation Center, volunteers from various programs. Someone had made a banner, "From Bridge to Home." "Speech," someone called out, and the room erupted in agreement. Marcus held up his hands. "This isn't my achievement to celebrate. It's James's. It's everyone in this room who decided that circumstances don't define worth, that being homeless doesn't mean being hopeless." "But you made it possible," James insisted. "You could have just been another politician with promises. Instead, you lived what we live. You saw what we see. That made all the difference." Later, standing on James's small balcony overlooking the city, Marcus reflected on the journey. 14 days that had seemed like a political stunt had become the foundation of genuine transformation. His phone buzzed. "Jennifer. Council meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m., housing budget discussion. Opposition is organizing." Marcus smiled. There would always be opposition, always be people who believed that helping the vulnerable was enabling weakness. But he'd learned something crucial during those 2 weeks on the streets. That dignity wasn't a limited resource. That extending humanity to others didn't diminish your own. Derek Brennan appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Mayor, I wanted you to know I submitted my application for the community policing supervisor position. The interview's next week. That's a significant step up. I figured if I'm going to help change the department, I need to be in a position to actually implement changes." Brennan hesitated. "Sir, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "That night I told you to leave my city. Did you know then that you were going to call me out at the inauguration?" Marcus thought about it. "Honestly, I didn't know what I was going to do. I just knew that what you represented, the idea that some people matter less, had to be confronted publicly, not to destroy you, but to start a conversation about what we'd been accepting as normal. It destroyed my ego, but I needed that." Brennan extended his hand. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for not giving up on yourself." A year after Marcus's inauguration, Riverside's transformation was undeniable. The homeless population had decreased by 67%. Crime rates were down 31%. Property values had actually increased in areas where housing programs were concentrated, disproving the myth that helping homeless people hurt neighborhoods. But the real measure of success wasn't in statistics. It was in moments like the one Marcus witnessed on a cold November evening, walking through the arts district after a community meeting. A young officer, one of the new recruits trained under Brennan's program, was talking with a man setting up a sleeping bag near a closed storefront. But instead of ordering him to move, the officer was on his radio. "Dispatch, I have someone at 5th and Main who needs access to the navigation center. Can you send an outreach team?" Marcus watched as the officer gave the man a blanket from his patrol car and sat with him until the outreach team arrived. This was the future he'd envisioned, a city where the first response to poverty was compassion, not enforcement. His phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Mayor Webb? This is Councilmember Patricia Morrison. I've been one of your critics, I know. But I wanted to call and tell you something." Marcus waited. "My brother was homeless for 3 years. Addiction, mental health issues. We didn't know where he was. Last month he walked into your navigation center. He's housed now, in treatment, rebuilding his life. So I wanted to say I was wrong. And thank you." After she hung up, Marcus stood on the cold street, watching the officer help a vulnerable person instead of criminalizing him. He thought about Derek Brennan, who'd transformed from antagonist to advocate, about James, who'd moved from bridge to home, about the 2,000 people now sleeping indoors who'd once been invisible. The city was changing, not perfectly, not completely, but genuinely, and it had started with 14 days of being invisible, of experiencing what it meant when people in power decided you didn't matter. Marcus had learned that real change required more than policy. It required empathy, understanding, the willingness to see every person, regardless of circumstance, as fully human. He'd told Officer Brennan it wasn't his city. He'd been right. It was everyone's city. And when everyone mattered, everyone belonged. That was the Riverside they were building. One person, one moment, one act of dignity at a time.